you for the very lovely introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here to speak to you. It's the thought that people want to hear what I have to say is very flattering. And after 32 years of marriage, it's not something I'm accustomed to. But as I gave a presentation on this over a decade ago to our club, and as I updated the slides, I realized, in the decade, there's a lot of exciting stuff that I wanted to share. So I hope I don't disappoint. I'm going to cover an understanding of Alzheimer's itself, explain why it's a big deal, why it's something we need to be aware of and pay attention to, give you the status of cures, and also what can we do for ourselves and our loved ones. Just a basic disclosure, I'm going to be talking about care practices, nutrition, supplements, drugs. If any of this interests you, you think it's appropriate, always talk to your own doctor. It goes without saying. Let me explain the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, because these are terms that are often misused. But it's really simple. Dementia is brain damage, but it's a symptom. It's due to something. And Alzheimer's is a disease that causes dementia. It's just like saying I have a fever. You have a fever, what does it do to? Well, I had an infection because I cut myself, or I have food poisoning. Nothing different. But it's understandable that these two terms are used interchangeably because Alzheimer's represents as many as 8 out of 10 cases. So it is the most common form of dementia that's out there. Now, there are many, many types. Vascular dementia is probably the second most common form. That's when typically you have blood flow to the brain is compromised, you have a stroke, and then there's brain damage. Many others, researchers have identified over 100 forms of dementia. But just to highlight, this thing of symptom versus disease, let's talk about brain trauma. Brain trauma is not metabolic. This is not because I'm sick or anything I've done bad, but I had the bad luck of getting my head banged. Not that long ago, football players sued the NFL for the dementia that they experienced from all of concussions and, I guess, poor helmets. So that's what Alzheimer's and dementia is. The challenge we have, if we're in this care profession, or if you have a loved one, if this is touching your life, is that it's an invisible disability. I mean, look at these two guys. Who here has the disability? Well, for sure, the guy in the wheelchair. Duh, he's in a wheelchair. You're not going to ask him to train for a marathon with you because he can't. That would be a stupid thing to say. But all day long, we interact with our loved ones with dementia, and we say things that are equally stupid. But if we look into their brains, we realize they have real disabilities taking place, real physical issues. These are pictures of healthy and demented brains. The healthy brain, full and robust. The demented brain, shrunken, shriveled, holes where brain matter used to be. These are PET scans, electrical images of a healthy brain and a demented brain. Red here indicates electrical signal. Brain cells shooting information back and forth, talking to each other, communication. You can see that there's a lot in the healthy brain and very little in the demented brain. And just like a guy in a wheelchair who can't use his legs, people with dementia can't do certain things. We say lose on the left and retain on the right because typically folks with dementia lose what we call left brain capabilities, left brain skills. And they become unable to deal with logic, facts, words, impulse control. But their right brain and certainly their feelings remain intact. Has anyone here who may have dealt with a loved one gotten into an argument over a fact? Does that sound like something you've experienced? I'm going to tell you a story. We got into this because my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's right around the end of the century, just the beginning of the year 2000 or so, and we cared for her for about 5 years. Midway through the course of the disease, we were having dinner. It was actually at Mary Lynn's parents' house, and my mom made a statement. She said that I was born in April. And in fact, my birthday is in November. So that's kind of funny, right? Your mom doesn't know your birthday. So I said, no, Mom, I was born in November. Oh, no. you were born in April. Here we go, you know? And I'm saying, no, Mom, I was really born in November. April, November, right? Back and forth. I think it's a riot. My mom doesn't know my birthday. How funny. Finally, I pull out my wallet. I show her my driver's license. Mom, I was born in November. She looks at it, and she says, not according to my paperwork. And you know, props to my mom for coming up with a peppy retort. But what was going on here is she had completely lost her ability to deal with logic and words and facts. But her feelings were very strong, and she was annoyed that her son was obviously having a little joke at her expense. So now, let's look at these two guys, and I ask you one more time, who's got the disability? So why is this a big deal? Well, according to the Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's is the 5th leading cause of death in the United States today. And that's up from 12, 25 years ago. And the reason it's rising up in the charts is because our medical community has done a great job of finding cures for other things that used to kill us. It's a big deal because there's a lot of people with the disease. Estimated at 7 million today, expected to double by mid-century. And it's expensive. The cost of care for our loved ones is significant. $400 billion today, expected to grow to $1 trillion by mid-century. Folks, $1 trillion, this is like percentages of GDP. And in addition to that is a hidden cost that we don't see all the time, but is very real. Millions of family caregivers providing untold hours of unpaid care. And then the additional stress, the anxiety, the extra health costs that they've experienced. So that's where we are. Is there a cure? There are a series of drugs that the industry offers. Back in the late 90s and the early noughts, the industry provided, let's call them the classic drugs. And they have names like Dementia and Aricept. They're frequently prescribed. They definitely are not cures. At best, they reduce symptoms, and maybe there's a temporary memory boost. There was a meta-analysis done a couple of years ago that looked at all of these again and said at the end of the day, they're no more effective than a sugar pill. Now, in the last 5 years, there's been an exciting new category of drugs come out. These are monoclonal antibodies. The most popular one is a drug called Leqembi. And what they do is try to target the amyloid plaque that presents itself in your brain cells if you have Alzheimer's. It's kind of like a sticky residue that is found on patients with dementia. Now, these drugs do buy you time, and they estimate as a practical matter, maybe it's 6 months to 1 year, which is something. These are very controversial drugs. They're very risky. They include brain swelling and brain bleeds, and some people have died because of them. The European Union initially did not approve them. Finally, after a lot of industry lobbying, they approved them for a much more narrow subset of potential patients. Now, while we're on the topic, it's worthwhile talking about the GLP-1s, you know, the Ozempics and the Wegovys, because these are maybe miracle drugs. They're great for helping people lose weight and controlling diabetes, and they're also showing wonderful results for Alzheimer's. And you think about it, though, so what happens, right? You lose weight, you reduce visceral body fat, hopefully you're eating less and you're eating better. All of these things help reduce your risk of dementia. So the conclusion with drugs is that there is no cure. There are things out there that are better than nothing, and if it's you or a loved one, you're going to give anything a try. But where does that leave us? What can we do? If we are caring for a loved one with dementia, if we have an aunt or an uncle or a mom or a dad, what can we do? You know, we want cures. We want drugs to give it to them so they can change, so they can be different. That's not going to happen. The only thing we can do is do things that make us different when we care for them. So I want to offer 2 golden rules. If any of you have this experience caring for someone, the first one is don't correct, redirect. You know, I told you that story. I got into this fight with my mom over my birthday. Who cares when my birthday is, right? And all I did was irk my mom and kind of embarrass her at a family gathering. It was unnecessary. Mary Lynn and I were visiting a client once, mom and daughter, and the mom said that she had moved to Chapel Hill 20 years ago. As soon as she said that, The daughter like exploded. She said, "What, Mom? No, we just moved you here last year. Don't you remember? We had to sell the house. Dad died. We brought you here. We had to remodel." Oh my goodness. There was a lot of baggage. There was a lot of stress. And of course, with reason and justification. But what difference did it make, right? And all it did was make Mom very upset, and she couldn't process those facts. The second golden rule is, if it does no harm, let it be. Now, a lot of times, folks with dementia, they want to stay independent, right? They want to continue to dress themselves. What an incredible indignity that people are going to put our clothes on for us. But that's what happens. So you let them dress themselves, but a lot of times the choices may not be ideal. Maybe the colors don't match. Maybe the socks don't match. So that's a common thing, but you know what? If it does no harm, let it be. I was at a client once. It was breakfast time. The wife had made this lovely breakfast, and the husband, who had dementia, poured his orange juice into his cup. And she was horrified. It's all going to get mixed up anyway, right? If it does no harm, let it be. My mom, I went this through my mom. My mom did not have strong eyebrows. She used to use a makeup pencil to put in her eyebrows. One day I was going to pick her up. We were going out for lunch, and, you know, she had dementia, and her physical capabilities were declining. Her eyebrows were not good. I said, "Ma, your eyebrows are crazy." And of course, she got all upset. She fixed them, went into the powder room, a lot of back and forth. This was way before I had my dementia training. What I should have said was, "Mom, you look beautiful. Let's go have a good time." Because the only person that was bothered by this was me. And if it did no harm, why didn't I let it be? One more thing. If you are dealing with a loved one with dementia, many times there are aberrant behaviors. There can be combativeness. There can be anger. There can be anxiety. Hard to explain. And a lot of times we go to our doctors, and the doctors give kind of psychiatric-oriented drugs that are at best very blunt instruments for managing specific behaviors. Be aware that a lot of times there are non-pharmacological approaches that have incredible results. And think about it this way. Our loved ones with dementia just can't tell us that, "Oh, my hip hurts," or "I have a stone in my shoe," or "I'm hungry," because they have lost that capability. We had a client, a gentleman, very physically robust. He lost his cognition early on, could not communicate, and he could be violent. He would push caregivers into the wall, and he was a strong man. And it turned out, so he wore leg braces because he had had polio as a young person, and his wife realized his leg braces were too bad. So she loosened the leg braces, and he became much more easier to deal with. We had a client, a gentleman, he was a retired UNC professor, Lewy body disease. He had some crazy behaviors, and his sweet daughter was just going crazy. She was beside herself. He would get up in the morning, like 3 a.m., put on his coat and tie to go to band practice. It turned out he was hungry. And why was that? He was being offered 3 meals a day. Well, you know, it was like vegetables and chicken and good quality food. And he would say, "I'm not hungry." And the caregiver would say, "Okay, he's not hungry. How much to do?" So I suggested to the daughter, I said, "Why don't you just let him graze and snack on stuff? You know, he's watching TV, and let him have some fun stuff, if that's okay with you." And she decided, you know, any calorie was a good calorie. So she let him eat some little chocolate chip cookies and some ice cream. And yeah, she threw in healthy things as she could. And his behaviors improved dramatically. So these are kind of overlooked things. If you're interested in this, I can get you resources. So now, here we are. I don't know how many of you might be dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia with a loved one. But I know every one of you don't want to get dementia yourself. And this is where I think some of the biggest changes in the last decade in terms of our understanding is really exciting. The first concept is plasticity. The old view used to be that you were born with a fixed number of brain cells, and if any of them were damaged, they were gone. The new view is that our brain is actually malleable, and it will restructure itself. It's adaptable. It can remodel itself based on how we use it and how we challenge it. The second new idea is that these dementias, this is not a disease of our brain. These are systemic diseases. These are based on our whole body. And researchers have identified two important pathways. One is the gut-brain axis, Because what goes on in our microbiome in our gut is directly significant in terms of our brain health. And the second one is the muscle-brain axis. And that's kind of interesting. And if that sounds like a novel idea, think of it this way. Our muscles are our largest endocrine organ. So what happens in our muscles affects our entire body. So with these insights, you know, the future may not be as bad as some people may think. Now, this is a picture of my dear sweet mom. And as I mentioned, you know, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We cared for her for about 5 years until she passed. And it was only like a few years ago I discovered something about my mom that I didn't know. That she was actually a dementia care expert. Because the things she would tell me to do are exactly the things that researchers say we should do to reduce our risk for the disease. How did she know? She'd tell me, eat a good diet, don't eat junk. She'd say, get plenty of sleep. Don't stop working late. You need your sleep. She'd tell me to go out and exercise. And she'd say, don't just watch TV. Go call Steve and go do something with Steve. Or do something that's good for your mind. And these are proven by a ton of research to have significant impacts in how we can protect ourselves against dementia. Now let's talk about food. We're going to break down each one. You've heard a lot of this before. I hate to be a party pooper, but you really want to limit your consumption of sugar, simple carbs, and highly processed food. So sugar and simple carbs, you know, they convert the blood sugar very quickly. That creates inflammation in our bodies, and that's bad. Dementia in its fundamental state is basically diseases of inflammation. Highly processed foods are bad because they have a lot of additives that mess up our microbiome, and that affects the gut-brain axis. What we can eat, well, you've probably seen this before too. This is like the Mediterranean diet, but fatty fish, eggs, nuts, dark green leafy vegetables, extra virgin olive oil, berries, avocados, coffee. This is a wonderful list, not an exclusive list, but you should try to include the stuff in your diet all along. You know, we could do an entire presentation on nutrition. I'm going to give you this one slide. Let's just call it food for thought. I want to talk to you about one thing, though. This is just a fun fact. Coffee, a recent study, this came out, I think, just earlier this year. 3 cups of coffee a day. It turns out that this is caffeinated coffee. Caffeine with the polyphenols of coffee are incredibly neuroprotective. And about 3 cups of coffee a day can lower your risk of dementia by 65%.
What about decaf, though? It doesn't?
No, it doesn't have the same effect.
Any effect?
The research that doesn't talk about decaf. I mean, there's polyphenols, but that combination is incredibly important. Yeah. Now, does anyone here work in a company where they provide coffee at no charge? My recommendation, that is one perk you want to take advantage of. What about supplements? Jim, let me finish. I'll be delighted. So what about supplements, right? We talk about nutrition. Obviously, that's important. Are there any supplements we should consider? My friends, there are a ton of supplements that probably can be helpful. I just want to highlight 2 that I personally think are worth considering in a quick conversation. And one is a multivitamin, the Humble multivitamin. Researchers did a study, and you'll see here, I provide the citations from all, these are all peer-reviewed academic research that provides the background for the statements I made. But a simple multivitamin, and this is given to older folks, let's say 65 and older, you know, our relevant population, reduces brain age, makes your brain effectively younger by an incredible 3 years. Simply taking a multivitamin. It's just a low-cost insurance policy. Another one that I think is really worth knowing about is a product called magnesium L-threonate. Now, you might remember, it was in the last year, we had a woman come from UNC. She was a researcher in the field of nutrition. And she recommended that we should have magnesium supplements in our diet. And the reason is because magnesium is really critical. It's important in over 300 metabolic processes. And we don't get enough of it. Typically, the average American doesn't have enough magnesium because even if you have a good diet, with soil depletion, it's not getting into our foods the way it really should be. So a good magnesium supplement is like a great, safe thing to do. What makes this magnesium special This is a patented formula developed by people at MIT. It crosses the blood-brain barrier so it gets into your brain. In 3 months, taking magnesium L-threonate reduced brain age of the studied populations by a remarkable 9 years. I honestly feel, folks, this is like a no-brainer. I take it, Mary Lynn takes it. Magnesium is an important supplement to have. You can get this on Amazon. It's not terribly expensive. What have you got to lose? Now, sleep. Sleep is really important because what happens when we sleep is our brains clean themselves. There's a lot of metabolism during the day. It creates detritus. The brains clean themselves when we sleep. So in a perfect world, we will get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And that's the sweet spot. Less is no good, and surprisingly more is no good. And, you know, sadly, if people have sleep problems, however you define that, your risk of dementia can go up significantly. Now, all I'm going to do is give you this one slide. You know, we can go on and on talking about sleep, right? I'll give you this one slide. The rest is up to you. No. What about exercise? The old view is that exercise is good. Exercise will reduce our risk of dementia anywhere from 15 to 45%. All the studies have been very, very positive about it. The new view is that intense exercise is incredibly good for us and will give us results at the very high end of that range. And it happens through 2 pathways. The first is better blood circulation. Well, all exercise gives us blood circulation. And that's helpful for us. That's constantly washing our brain. But intense exercise does a couple of things that we have only learned about in the recent decade. First, when you do intense exercise, once you get past a certain threshold, our muscles release proteins, and some of those proteins are neuroprotective. The second thing is when you're lifting, for example, a challenging weight. Like, very common, as a guy, you know, we've all lifted weights in our youth, and then we go to the gym. Well, I don't want to hurt myself. I'll just stay with a light weight. That's okay. Nothing bad about that. However, if you're lifting a light weight, your muscle's doing something it's done for a long time, and it's not being challenged at all. If you lift a heavy weight, your brain is telling that muscle to recruit muscle fibers that have not been used before. And that is neuroprotective. And that leverages the plasticity. So intense exercise and heavy weight training, to the extent that you can do it, is beneficial and neuroprotective. What about social engagement? Really important. It's a very bad thing to be alone as we age, and researchers have identified kind of a 2-step process. Number 1, maintain the core, cherish close family and friend relationships, and stretch the perimeter. Put yourself sometimes in new situations that might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone. You know, and our membership here in Rotary is a wonderful way to do that, for starters. We get together, and we often sit on Fridays with our friends. And that's cool, because that's what we're here for. But also, you go on a service project, and maybe you're doing something with 3 or 4 people you really haven't gotten to know, and you're pushing that little boundary again. So always good things to do, and being here at Rotary is a good start. I want to end this presentation sharing one piece of research that I think is really fascinating. This came out in about the last year or so. Researchers looked at what profession had the lowest risk of Alzheimer's. And they looked at 9 million people in the United States who passed away from 2020 to 2022, over 400 different occupations. Now, I've just selected 8 of them because of space considerations, but one of these occupations was the lowest risk for Alzheimer's.
Taxi driver.
And one of them happened to be the highest risk as well. So, okay, I mean, so, history, who votes for the history professor? Teacher of ESL, English as a second language. Maybe, okay. Rotary Club president. Peanut farmer. All right. Oncologist. Who votes for the oncologist? Lowest risk of Alzheimer's disease. Someone said taxi driver. Okay. And realtor. And pump operator. All right. Well, the folks who voted for the taxi driver were indeed correct.
Yeah.
And why could that be? Well, taxi drivers, now think about this. These are people who died around 2020. And let's say they were 75 years old. That means they were born in 1945, which means they were plying their trade in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s before there was GPS. They had to navigate the old-fashioned way. They used a ton of spatial processing. They would rarely take the same route, and they would always have to make decisions in real time, because there's a traffic jam here, there's an accident over there, and they have to reroute. There was a separate study done with London taxi drivers. If you're familiar with London, you know the roads there make 0 sense. And they have to study those roads. They actually, in this study, it was proven that London taxi drivers have larger hippocampi than the hippocampus is the part of the brain critical for Alzheimer's disease. And that was, this type of activity was deemed neuroprotective. Now, what can we learn? Well, you know, you could stop using GPS once in a while. Try to do it the old-fashioned way. If you go on vacation, you get the tourist map, just try to get by with that, you know, just to see how that works. You can enjoy activities that require spatial reasoning. Some things that researchers identify, chess, I guess, is always a good one. Fine woodworking and complex quilting involves three-dimensional relationships. But importantly, I think if there's a summary you can get from all the different things that I read and see is, you know, do things that are different and do things that change. That's my presentation. I hope it helps you understand. You didn't let me get my last pun in. I hope it lets you understand Alzheimer's and dementia, and when it comes to protecting yourself against dementia, I hope it leaves you feeling like our friend the taxi driver, like you are in the driver's seat.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, first off, Lorenzo, I was really disappointed that the oncologist didn't win that. But more importantly, you know, one of the classic drugs that we use a lot of are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And if inflammation is sort of the basis of this, along with everything these days, is there any data that suggests that once you get over the ulcers and the other problems from those drugs, that in fact it affects your brain?
Yeah, I think that if I recall, I looked into this a few years ago just for my own knowledge. They actually affect your brain negatively. So yeah, they'll help reduce or solve the difficulty you have with inflammation, but they don't get at the underlying cause of inflammation. And there's 2 types of inflammation, right? Broadly speaking, we have inflammation that results from something acute, like I because I heard that hurts, right, and that helps. The other thing, the bigger type of inflammation we can call low-grade inflammation that's persistent in many people because we have poor diets and we don't exercise. And that is not something where and actually, I think there's some research, NSAIDs moderately will increase erythropoiesis. Jennifer.
Somebody else's mic, go there.
Jim.
2 quick ones. Tea, caffeine. Tea is good as coffee.
So, you know, probably tea broadly is good. All sorts of teas are good. You know, caffeine is good, and the polyphenols of these drinks are good. So, I don't know, Jim. You know, a quick search on ChatGPT will tell us what the latest things are. But yeah, I mean, they're probably fine.
A bigger question is, my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's and stayed happy to the end. And I remember the doctor, some ever heard it said that if we are, once Alzheimer's has taken place, then our inner personality really dominates what we do.
Yeah.
Is that so?
Yeah.
If you're an angry person, you stay. If you're a happy person, you continue with being even happier.
You know, I think there's some validity to that. If you remember the slide where we say lose on the left and retain on the right, one of the key things is you lose impulse control, which means you are free to just say and do what initially comes to your mind, right? One of the situations we encounter often in a care environment is the guy who has his eye on the young CNA, or the young nurse, and is suggesting to go out, or worse than that, more offensive than that. And, you know, there's nothing unnatural about a guy admiring a pretty woman, right? It's just our impulses. We've been trained to say, well, don't do that, you know, stop that. But we lose that impulse control, and that natural thing comes out. And I would say I hadn't heard it just like that, but I think that's probably pretty accurate. With the exception of negative behaviors, because there's a lot of negative behaviors, but you know, if you look at if you think of the other slide, a lot of negative behaviors, I don't think you should say, oh, they're really a bad person. You know, now they have Alzheimer's and they're nasty. You can have pain, you can have fear, you can have frustration, you can be tired, and you can't explain it, and it's just not a happy world for you. And somehow people are poking you and prodding you and showing up and wanting to do things that you're not interested in doing. And I'd be grumpy too. Yeah. I'm sorry? Shigrix. I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. Oh, shingles vaccine. Well, I have read that seems to be neuroprotective. I don't know much about it. Yeah, but I recently read, there was an article in The Economist on this, like yesterday. A friend passed it to me, and they mentioned that. So apparently there's some advantage. One thing for sure, Matt was asking, what about the shingles vaccine? So definitely keeping ourselves healthy through different avenues is a good thing, and that includes preserving our eyesight and preserving our hearing and avoiding obesity and avoiding high cholesterol and all these factors, avoiding pollution. All of these things will improve our risk or improve the likelihood we avoid it. So in that way, right, keeping us safe from something is good.
I'll wait.
Okay, sure. Whoever, yeah, Jen.
So I've always assumed that Alzheimer's was genetic because I know that it runs in my family. But what do you attribute? You said it's going to increase over the next 20, 30 years. So is that because our population is aging? And how does that track with both the lifestyle choices versus genetics of Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, yes, it is genetic. It is tied to a gene they call the ApoE4 gene, and you get one from your mom and one from your dad. And if you happen to get two, and you have two of those, your risk of Alzheimer's grows dramatically, like 4 or 5 or 6-fold or maybe 9-fold. So it is very genetic, right? And you have folks who do everything wrong, and they're as sharp as a tack. And it doesn't matter, they're just not going to get Alzheimer's. And folks who do everything right, and sadly they get it. So part of it is genetic. And I apologize, the second part of the question was...
Why is it increasing?
Yeah, why is it increasing? Yeah, largely it's increasing because we're all getting older, and think of the baby boom. Right now, we're all entering those last 3 decades of our life when the likelihood, the risk for dementias increases due to age. So that's why it's increasing. Yes.
In reading that Economist article, they also say because of some of the trends to do healthy things,
Yeah.
Vaccines, diet, exercise, that actually the prediction, what the percent of the population that will get Alzheimer's is not as high as they had thought.
Yeah, that's accurate. And that was... Yeah, so the question was, there was an article that came out in The Economist yesterday. I'm really glad my sister forwarded it to me because you're asking me that. But it noted that the alarm of Alzheimer's and dementia may not be as bad as initially thought. Because researchers and statisticians were looking at the initial growth curve of the last 20 years and saying, just applying it to population growth, and it's like this, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And it's known that as we get older, say if we're, in our 60s, the risk of dementia might be 1 or 2%. When we're in our 70s, it's maybe 6 or 7%. When we're in our 80s and 90s, it can be double-digit percentages. So it's going to get worse the older we get. But this report said it's not as bad as some projections have been. Now, just how bad is bad, I don't know if the numbers I showed you, these came from the Alzheimer's Association. it's still a serious thing. The good news is that, if there's a message here, is that these healthy lifestyle behaviors that a lot of people are starting to embrace work, and they're bringing the trend down.
And they mentioned the shingles vaccine too. But it's all the things you promoted.
Yeah,
One more.
whoever, yeah.
Ryan?
Carry on, Kathy.
No, I just wanted
Go.
to confirm that this has been out about the last maybe a year, this correlation with shingles vaccine and the reduction of dementia. And so that's been shown in many different studies.
Great.
And the second point about the inflammation, what NSAIDs would be helpful, is this inflammation is the same as a metabolic inflammation. The slow smoldering time. And so there are measures for that get very involved, but a simple one is a C-reactive protein.
Your microphone is not on.
C-reactive. So there are measures for low-grade inflammation is more a metabolic disorder. And so one of the ways to measure that is C-reactive protein. There's one's called HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. But in any event, that's why an NSAID would work the same way with this type of inflammation. And so it's blood sugar. Blood sugar is only a reflection of insulin. And so fasting insulin times your fasting blood sugar divided by 405 gives you a ratio. And that ratio shows you one of the measures of inflammation. And so that's how you can go about knowing which ties into eating. So processed foods raises this inflammation. Metabolic fat is stored around the abdomen, so you can use your abdominal burden as a measure as well. But fasting insulin is more sensitive than your blood sugar, and because that's a late find. Your blood sugar only goes up when the insulin can't cover it anymore. So if you want to know how you're doing metabolically, get your fasting insulin.
There you go.
Okay.
Great. Sounds good.
In-house program, folks. Great job, Lorenzo. Thanks so much. Everyone, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.